Welcome back to the Dear Global Leader podcast solo episode. So, today we will look again into a study case to decrypt one of the questions that can be relevant for global leaders or global professionals. And today we'll look at the case of Nokia. So, don't stop here. I know that a lot of people will think that they know already everything that there is to know about the Nokia case, but we'll discuss innovation, pivot, and the future. So it's the case of a lot of us, especially when you have a position of dominance. You can start loving your ideas, loving your strategy, and then this can be a bit deadly. So today we will look at the case of Nokia and the day that they knew that the iPhone will kill them and they still did nothing. So let's look at the numbers, as always. So we are now back in 2007, and Nokia is this undisputed champion and giant of the phone industry. It sells nearly tens of millions of phones devices yearly, control globally the market, but at the same time control 50% of the handset shipment. And at that time, Apple launched the iPhone and redefined completely what the phone industry is. The ecosystem, the app, the touchscreen, and the world changed overnight. What is the definition of the phone? And this is the story of how Nokia leadership failed to act decisively under this paradigm shift that they didn't see it coming. And we could ask the question how these powerful leaders that had all of the data, all of the revenue, and all of the brand power didn't see coming the future shift. So, a few more numbers to understand the scale of the challenge. At that time, Nokia was the biggest player and had 40% market share in the smartphone industry and was the biggest player for about a decade. They were really recognized for their reliability, but also the scale of their technology. And at the same time, in 2007, the iPhone redefined the UX, the design first perspective. What is interesting to look at is that the consumer expectation were running as a cycle that were faster than the decision making of Nokia, because in the same situation 1 year later, 2008, Android was already trying to gather up their OEM partners and open innovation community to figure out a way to the future. So at that time, we could already understand that the hardware excellence alone was no longer enough, and that we were in a new area where software development and ecosystem covered by design perspective was the new value creation. So now we look at the first pillar of the strategy of Nokia that led them to fail. And they were at the cross intersection between two choices. Either they could preserve their core strategy and technology, or they could embrace the innovation and go with the more ecosystem and smartphone technology that were redefining the industry. And at that time, they actually decided to preserve the core revenue stream, which was coming from the Symbian. It's the platform that they were using to operate the operating model of their phone, and they decided to continue to operate under this software. And afterwards, when they saw that this was not moving further and not adding any revenue compared to the new smartphones that were coming on the market, they decided to partners with different other software, but also Microsoft. They tried to migrate towards this ecosystem of Windows Phone, but unfortunately, this move came too late, too slow, too fragmented, and they move outside of the window door. And at that time, even the leadership was trying to preserve this Symbian revenue case, operating model, continuing to not change into their strategy and not see the shift that were happening into the consumer mindset, but also the ecosystem area that were needed to revolution this industry. And now we'll discuss the second pillar of this analysis, that was the execution at scale of their next strategy to enter into the smartphone industry. As I told you before, they try to partner with different software options and also with Windows. And then they were trying to create the next smartphone with the Nokia vision. And this is where also there were a bit of a mismatch of strategy, because internally inside Nokia, there were different software that were developed and maintained. So we had the Symbian, the one that were the in-house one. Then they partner with other software, and they also try the Windows Phone. So they had to maintain and develop different strategy at the same time, and this was already a bit chaotic. At the same time, Android and iOS were becoming more and more the software that were accepted by the consumer. And the market was expecting a consolidation from Nokia to comply with this new UX and ecosystem needs from the consumer. Unfortunately, Android tried to partner with Nokia multiple times, and they missed out on the opportunity, and they try to put to try to partners with Windows instead. That was not the ecosystem that were wanted by the consumer. So this was another mismatch. And on top of that, it was also an in-house bureaucracy and leadership, slow decision making that didn't make this development and phase very easy. So in the end, Nokia launched its own smartphone way too late and with the wrong, in brackets, software, not a software that were universal and not something that that sounded trendy and in the wave of the time that people were expecting from them. And now in the third pillar, we look at what they did and didn't do. And I actually told you that at some point they partnered with Microsoft, but this was already in 2011, so 4 to 5 years after that the iPhone was launched, and also that the other brand has had involved and incorporated with the Android software ecosystem. So they were way too slow and were too late. They were too late to make the platform shift and too slow to reorganize around the ecosystem and UX design. And at that time in 2013, they decided to sell out their handset business. And this really created a very, they had 40% of market share. So it was a very interesting time for the industry of the telecom at the time. And it completely changed the structure of the game. And so now we are already into the three takeaways. This is the section that I love the most. You may think that, yeah, the Nokia case is a known case, but to be honest, we are reliving this reality with AI. The breadth of the innovation in terms of technology AI that is happening is challenging a lot of us and a lot of companies to not always stick to what works, but also understand what is coming next. And this is why I did this episode. So, what are the three takeaways? The number one is don't protect the old successes at the expenses of the emerging realities. This is exactly what Nokia did, and this is a lot of what we do with our, maybe fearing mindset, or also when you are in the success and in the global position, you can be very easily blinded by your own success and believe that your ideas are the best one and don't see the next trends and the next emerging commerce coming at you. The second takeaway is that software is beating the hardware alone. And I know this can be takeaway that is hard for a lot of us to incorporate, because it's a new area of software as a service and service economy, and the hardware become less of a value for the consumer. And it's up to us to make sure that the platform doesn't lock us in, but that the software can expand the ecosystem and amplify the network. And this is the power of the software. And this is what a lot of companies needs to make the shift in, is that they need to add value by added connectivities, sensors, softwares, technology inside the initial offers that were only the hardware. Because the hardware only is not anymore differentiation in the era of technology that we are in. The last one is really an interesting one because it's actually that the early adopters trumps the best executors. This is a misconception that happens to a lot of us that are maybe hard workers and see newcomers not having a perfect solution, not having a perfect, I don't know, marketing, communication, product, and service, but because they were there first, they established a credibility, and also they established a name. And then later they had the time to do the loop improvement processes and then fill up their gaps, remove their imperfection, and then they already created a place for the market for themselves. And this is where Nokia failed a bit because they took time to create the perfect smartphone that they thought the market will need and not follow the trend. And there were also players that just decided to follow the trend and after found out where they would like to differentiate, where they would like to adapt their product or their service or their software, but they were established. And then when Nokia was fully ready, there were not anymore a lot of place on the market. And this is also a parallel we can do in so many industries. When there is like few players, people will remember the few players. When the red ocean is red, it's not the time to figure it out that you wanted to go back when it was blue. So the story of Nokia today is a story of decision making under innovation and market tension. And the question I would like that everybody ask themselves is, are you adapting before it's urgent or only after it's obvious? So thank you so much for listening or watching this episode. As always, feel free to give me some comments or share your support by putting some 5 stars and review. It really helped the podcast and helped me continue to do these videos and also find great guests. So thank you so much, and I see you in the next analysis. Bye bye.